Rick Hale, Mojo Monday, my friend. How are you?
Couldn't be better. Thanks, Brett. Good morning and happy Mojo to you.
Yeah, I know it's our favorite time of the week. We are
100%.
in the book, The Algebra of Happiness. And outside of just going with some chapters, we're actually just kind of picking some topics that he tackles in this book and adding our experiences around it. Last week, we talked about advocacy and the power of advocacy. And today, we're actually going to talk about this crazy little thing called the imposter syndrome. And Rick, I'll just set it up and then kick it to you. You know, the title of this chapter in his book is called Believe You Deserve It. And it actually talks about the anxiety is sort of dissipating as you realize that most successful people reach beyond their grasp. 70%, Rick, of Americans admit to experiencing imposter syndrome. I think that's crazy that that number is that big. But then as you start to think about it, it really kind of plays itself out. So let's define it. Imposter syndrome means basically you've succeeded, you're being recognized for some level of success personally or professionally. And that little voice on your shoulder says, you're a fraud. You didn't earn it. You didn't deserve it. And 70% of Americans listen to that voice on their shoulder a little bit. Rick, what do you think about that?
Well, you wonder what the source is. One is the symptom, which is the thought. And then you think about, well, where did that come from? And it's probably something in your childhood, either a disappointment, a shortfall, or you slipped in, or and you succeeded at something or perceived success. And so part of it could be generational or baggage that you're carrying around and how you see yourself. The other half of it is not taking an honest look at all of yourself. And you're probably doing some sort of, you're falling prey to the comparison trap of comparing yourself to someone else. It's that whole, compare, your insides to someone's outside.
Somebody else's outsides. Yeah.
That's a trick and a trap, because no matter what, what did Deion Sanders say the other day? He said, who's your role model? He goes, man, there's a lot of people out there modeling roles.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, that is a crazy twist on role model, because, ultimately he leaned into spiritual guides. The Jesus was where he went with it, in this press conference, which was interesting to me too. And but at the end of the day, he said there's a lot of people modeling roles, which implies in itself we're all, not all, but 70% feel on some level they're perpetrating.
Yeah. He said, he wrote in the book, he said, there's always this insecurity whispering in my ear. I know who you really are. And it makes me think like, okay, I'd be lying if I didn't say there were times in my life where that little insecurity figure on my shoulder whispered, hey, I know who you really are, into my ear. But I'm trying to take this forward. Like, is it the perfection culture that we kind of exist in that says, hey, if you weren't perfect, you didn't deserve it? And I think about like, I'll use football because we attended a pretty awesome football game over the weekend, but irrelevant. How many games do you have to win to, when you win the championship, deserve the fact that you won it? Or what if, Rick, you played a mediocre game as a player, but still won the championship? Did you deserve it? Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's the problem with this conversation, or our challenge, is that it's a complicated conversation.
Yeah.
And there's a multitude of things that might be playing into feeling like an imposter or less deserving, or, or maybe, to your point, you set the bar so high, it's an impossible thing to achieve. And you constantly chastise and criticize yourself when you come up short, recalibrate, reset, and then come up short again. So there's got to be balance in here. And one of the things I thought about when you were talking about it, belief, everyone falls prey. So I think we're humans having a human experience. And I think we also compare ourselves to our individual things against our whole. In other words, you compare someone's absolute core genius, brilliant thing that they do. Let's say it's sports, an incredible quarterback who's handsome, but we're judging ourselves athletically against someone who that's their core genius. And then we judge it against our whole, thinking they've somehow, because they're good at one thing, they're good at everything. And I've networked into some pretty cool environments and people who are incredibly successful on paper. They're incredibly successful on social media. They're incredibly successful with their cars, their houses, their lifestyle, their family. They're just postcard people. And I promise you, 10 minutes into a conversation, if you ask the right questions, you'll reveal something about them that is an area of insecurity and uncertainty and anxiety.
Oh,
so
100%.
it's common. I think one is accepting it and then realize we're humans having a human experience.
Yeah. I still kind of hung up on the fact that you used the word handsome when you described the successful quarterback, but
well, she could be beautiful.
There you go. Whatever. All right.
I could be right.
Think about what would be worse. And this is going to go a little out of left field, but what if I live so much in my ego that I have no voice trying to tell me, be humble, stay humility, don't let your ego get so big that if I almost feel like sometimes a little imposter syndrome keeps us humble, but then again, the imposter syndrome is also the thing psychologically that tears us down.
Yeah, I think the primary question is when you analyze your life and you look down at all 12 categories in the wheel of life and you go, where am I falling short that I can control? And that with the right advocate, coach, or someone pushing or holding me accountable, my life just simply gets better. There's a saying that if you want to love yourself more, do hard things. And so if you want to grow faster, do harder things. If you want to, failing, it's a common theme we use, failing forward. So on some level, being an imposter might be perpetrating being something or being somewhere or having something that you haven't really done the work to achieve. And maybe this is a good moment to take a deep breath and go, what if I did the work? What if I really doubled down on the algorithm for success and got up a little earlier, stayed a little later, or found leverage in my life, in the form of a teammate or some tool?
Yeah.
And really so part of the imposter might be that, back to that bar being so high that you're constantly feeling less than. But what if you did what it took to clear the bar? And if you could identify it, it's out there. There are role models. And, back to your point, though, you did ask a question and I didn't hit it head on, but you said, what if, you live in this ego space? And we all know that person that runs around pounding on their chest and you're like, yeah, come on, man, you're just like us. And somehow they're getting success, or maybe they're not, and it's just ego. I think that takes an honest person who's unemotionally attached to have that conversation and help that person see reality. So maybe it's a coach or a hired gun with expertise in a category.
Yeah. Sometimes we prepare these calls and sometimes things just pop in our head as we're talking. And this is one of those things that just popped in my head. Is John Wooden, the famous great basketball coach of UCLA back in the 70s and 80s. He didn't judge the success by results. He judged the success by preparation. And it speaks to what you were just saying is if you're winning and having results and then you feel like a fraud, maybe if you just defined your win or your success by how you played or how you prepared the game, practice, it actually removes the thought of the whole imposter syndrome because you controlled your activities. You controlled how you approached life instead of what life gave you in terms of feedback. Does that make sense?
It makes 100%
Off the
sense.
cuff,
What you're saying is by the leading indicator, not the lagging indicator, which is nothing more than a scoreboard. And often success can be hollow if the journey isn't worthy or isn't fulfilling. So part of this is what to quote our buddy Saperston, Eric, who'd say, how do you wake up inspired and go to bed fulfilled? And it's basically crafting a plan that feeds your soul and then living into that plan and doing the work.
Yeah. For sure.
And so it's the work, it's the progress, it's the journey, it's the lives you touch and interface with along the way that, you know, if that was your focus in helping lift other people along the way in every conversation, maybe you chalk a win that feels a little more sincere and a little more authentic.
I love it. How do we bow tie this conversation? Like, I hear us talking and I hear us saying, hey, this is an imposter syndrome. Don't get caught up in ego. Some ego's good. Too much imposter syndrome's bad. How do I navigate this conversation in life, Rick?
It's got to be with a personal conversation with yourself. Create sacred space this week. Maybe it's a 45 minutes, you know, sitting on a rock in the woods or a stump, and taking a few deep breaths about, hey, where are the gaps and the opportunity for where you sit and where you are? And then being honest about whether, you know, it's false ego or bravado keeping you from something, because the humility it takes to ask for help is hard to connect those dots. Sometimes when you're perceived the guy or girl, you know, it's really hard to humble yourself and say, I don't have this figured out.
Yeah.
I'm really not sure. And so maybe it's being honest about where false bravado is getting in the way and where some insecurity lives inside your heart and mind about something. And the only reason you're insecure is you haven't taken that first step to prove to yourself that you have capacity for progress in that direction.
Absolutely.
You know, that requires faith.
The other thing I'd add to this is last week we actually talked about advocates, right? And we were talking about being advocates for other people, yet sometimes we need advocates in our life too. And one of the words, we've defined it in previous episodes in different contexts, were lifters and leaners, right? And in this conversation, it's really a lifter, somebody that lifts us up, but helps us connect to the success in a healthy way, not a feed the ego way or a manipulation kind of way, right?
Yeah, someone who can ask really good questions so that you self-discover your truth. That's what you want. Someone who's introspective, but also, again, bold enough to tell you the truth, but in a kind way with candor attached. And so that's the key to, in my book, to having a great coaching experience. And that person awaits you in every single category. That's the other thing. There's no one person that can fix, solve, and cure every category of life.
Well, that speaks to Dion's comment. There's a lot of people in different roles.
100%. So maybe self-assessment and self-reflection is a good idea this week. Where do you feel like, you know, either the imposter piece is there and you feel like a fraud because people perceive you different than you are, and, you know, under the hood, you just haven't checked the right boxes or taken the steps. Maybe employ a few of those steps so that you can eliminate that false fear. That you're less than, because you do deserve it. You just got to do the work.
This book, The Algebra of Happiness by Scott Galloway, is happiness attainable?
Yeah, I believe so.
Do the work, right?
You got to do the work. You got to check enough boxes. It's really your story and your script. The problem with happiness is we're sometimes chasing someone else's story, and that never ends well. And so figure out your story, live into it, and give yourself the credit that's due when you do the work.
Yeah. That's why I love this this series we're doing, because I do believe everybody can discover their happiness, right? Yet there's certain little things inside of this book that he's attempting to just kind of bring to the surface. This imposter syndrome is one of them, that are conversations you need to have with yourself to find ultimately your happiness, right?
That's it. You nailed it.
There you go.
Great book.
Mojo Monday, my friend. See you next week.
See you next week.